now I'd love to introduce you to our speaker today. We have Tony Higgins, Chief Product Officer at Blueprint Software Systems. Tony, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Berna. You can hear me okay, just to confirm? Oh, yep. Good. Okay, thanks very much. And thanks everybody for joining today. So yeah, let's get right into it. During today's presentation, we're going to examine what's being advanced by the major RPA vendors as conventional wisdom for scaling automation programs within the enterprise, the concept of the citizen developer. The basic premise of this concept is that automating your business is so simple that anybody in a line of business or operations team with a modicum of training can develop, deploy, and support process automations, which sounds great on the surface, but does it really work? So we'll get into that in a second, but before we jump in, I think it's important for those of you who are not familiar with Blueprint, just to give a little background and context, because of course that informs our point of view. So enterprises across the globe have been leveraging the capabilities of the Blueprint platform to build mission critical systems for well over 15 years now. So we have a pretty good idea of what it takes to build robust software in complex operating environments. Global leaders from every industry are using our cloud-based enterprise transformation suite in tandem with their RPA platforms to capture, identify, design, develop, and manage high-value automations with precision and with ease. Now, in addition, we've also built a robust partner network of global system integrators and boutique providers that have developed service offerings based on our software platform to drive high-value outcomes for all of their clients. So the point is, we're not new to this game. We've been working on these barriers for a long time, have an intimate understanding of the real challenges to driving success in automation programs. So from this perspective, in our point of view, there's really three critical decisions that you have to make and have to get right to be successful with an RPA program. And that begins with the choice of the RPA tooling environment. And so that decision alone has become much more complex over the years. There's now many choices to be made in terms of not only the core execution platform, but the additional tools that support the end-to-end environment. In addition, you've got decisions to make on your operational model, how you're going to go and execute against your RPA objectives. They'll certainly factor into the outcome, and we have a strong point of view based on our experience, meaning that we see most often being the most successful way to organize for RPA success. And then finally, we hear all the time that organizations are struggling to identify which are the high value and the most executable target processes for ingest into the RPA program. Here at Blueprint, we've developed a multidimensional analysis capability that helps prioritize the right processes, and we're going to share that with you today. This capability of ours has really been extracted from those multiple years of experience in working with customers across several industries and around the world to help them identify those right processes to automate. So those are really the three critical decisions. And I just want to jump into each, just take them off one at a time. So from a tooling perspective, there's three classes of tools that have emerged in the RPA domain. There's process discovery tools that help identify and define processes for automation. There are the core RPA execution platforms where you build and execute automations. And then there's the whole set of additional operational tools that help you manage automations across their full life cycle in order to optimize your returns in a sustainable way. So in terms of the execution platforms, which is sort of the fundamental RPA tooling, most organizations that we interact with have already made initial investments in that space. But for those that haven't, we're seeing increased specialization emerging in terms of the choices available. So there's the general purpose RPA platforms that are more the mainstream, like let's say UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, Microsoft Power Automate, to name a few. But we're also seeing now many of the major software players like SAP, Salesforce, just for example, making big investments in their own RPA execution capabilities. Now, we think that's a trend that's going to continue because with many growing markets, ultimately it leads to specialization. And so organizations that happen to be reliant on one of these major platforms, like SAP, as I mentioned, Salesforce, they're going to have some interesting choices to make. Likewise, we're seeing the emergence of, I guess we'd call functional specific RPA capabilities for things like contact centers or HR or finance that support the specific processes in those departments. And then overall, we see most organizations ending up with starting to evolve into multiple execution platforms for the RPA program. And that's going to require these organizations to develop an operational model that can support multiple implementation options, which is something that we'll talk about in a little bit as well. When we look at discovery, that's probably the most dynamic and diverse space right now in terms of approaches being taken. You have your process mining vendors. They're focused on extracting process intelligence from log files and other application artifacts. You've got task mining tools that are focused on extracting information from user behavior within applications. And then lastly, there's a newly emerging class of tools that provide more comprehensive capability to not only extract current state process information like the mining tools, but can also provide a full set of design capabilities to help design the future or to-be state of the process flows for automations. So full disclosure, that is in fact where Blueprint is focused. So I'm going to dig into that space a little more and provide additional detail because we feel it's one of the most dynamic and diverse spaces where there's quite a variance in terms of the choices and the options that are available to people today. So if you look at all the different choices you have available where process discovery solutions are concerned, whether it's the mining tools, process mining, task mining, or the more comprehensive platforms, you do see some commonalities, at least in terms of the mining tools. And that is they all lean very heavily on technology. So you hear all the major, technology buzzwords coming from, these quarters like machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer vision technology. There's just a lot of technology being thrown at the problem as a means to a solution. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the past few years is that the end result tends to introduce a lot of noise in the data, requires significant skill sets in order to actually ingest and transform that noise into something meaningful, something you can actually leverage downstream to yield actionable information for automation or any other output. And to be specific about it, what we see across the mining tools is a pretty low success rate today that creates more challenges instead of solutions. There's a lot of manual reconciliation involved, very labor intensive, in the end, delaying time to value. So at Blueprint, we've decided based on that to take a fairly different approach to this whole space and problem. Our approach is not as technically centric. In fact, I'd call it human driven. We believe that you already have the subject matter experts and the process owners in your organization that know how your company operates. You don't actually need AI and machine learning to tell you how your business works, at least at the higher levels. So your subject matter experts can already define your current state again at the higher level. And by virtue of that, you can provide some structure or context to how that data is being captured, as opposed to just vacuuming up tons of data and then trying to make sense of it. By providing a structured way to capture data, you get all the results, you get the details about what's actually happening inside the process, which is, of course, essential for automation and especially also essential for prioritization of the candidates. Another flaw that we've seen with a lot of the discovery tools in the market is that they don't have the capabilities to design a future state. They're great at collecting and providing, again, tons of data on current state, but not so great at then evolving or turning that into a set of data to represent the future state. A key step in the automation lifecycle, of course, is optimizing your processes before they're automated. And when you use discovery tools to uncover your current state, there may be lots of waste, variances, redundancies that, of course, you're going to want to remove and prune out. So having the capability to design a future state is something that you're going to need. And whether you use Blueprint to do that or another tool, we just don't think the mining tools that are on the market today are enough to be able to ingest, transform, and ultimately yield this final state process perfectly tuned for automation. So once again, we're taking a very different approach than most of the rest of the entire market. Obviously, we think it's the right approach, and we invite you to reach out to us if you want to explore it further. From a tooling perspective, there are lots of choices in terms of the execution space and the discovery space. And these choices are incredibly important in order to identify the right processes for automation. Yet the decision can be quite complex because these tools all approach process discovery so differently. As we transition and look at the operational models, a lot of the conventional wisdom is built around the notion of, well, this notion that's being promoted by the major RPA vendors that's commonly known as citizen developers. So the idea of a citizen developer is that a non-technical user is able to develop automations broadly across the organization. Now, at Blueprint, in our experience, we just haven't seen that approach to be particularly successful. It's evolving, but to date, not particularly successful. From an operational perspective, the burden of the citizen developer is one that we think is still quite steep. Expecting your business and operation folks to develop and drive automation is unrealistic because the RPA tools, regardless of the type of execution platform you end up with, are still just very complex. They're essentially development environments. And in order to build robust automations, you have to be able to do things like understand the intricacies of exception handling, other typical development tasks. And then like any other type of development, you have to test it, of course, thoroughly before you deploy it, and then support it throughout its life cycle. It's never, one and done. So these highly specialized skills that most IT organizations have today, they have their own class of tools and processes for doing that work. Due to that reality, we don't think that it's the citizen developer approach that scales out readily to business users. You're not going to become a developer, a tester, somebody who can support complex technology across the full life cycle of a bot, as a part-time job. Additionally, when you layer in the risk and exposure that many of these automations have from a security perspective or a compliance perspective and start layering all that on, we just don't see this as the pure citizen developer model as scaling out very easily. So, and we've seen this before where powerful technology has been deployed to the business and then it's had to be rolled back or pushed back into an IT context. If we remember the days of Microsoft Access, Lotus Notes, lots of examples across time where there's been an attempt to push that model, just again having to be reversed. So we support the idea of scaling out to a broad set of people with a centralized RPA Center of Excellence or COE. We just don't think that it's being promoted and encouraged in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the citizen developer is the right model. Alternatively, we have a concept here at Blueprint that we call instead citizen designers. So it's an important distinction between a designer and a developer because there's a real separation of concerns there. We essentially extracted the concept from a quote from Steve Jobs where he famously said at one point, design isn't what color it is or what shape it is, or a lot of things that people think and associate with design. Fundamentally, design is how something works. So repeating what I've already said, we believe that you have the people in your organization that already know how your business works. You have many process owners and subject matter experts that know your current state. Those are your citizen designers. What we're trying to do in terms of creating a different operational model is to lean into that, provide the right set of capabilities and tools to arm citizen designers with the assistance they need so they can define these future state processes and ultimately design automations to be passed into your RPA COE for implementation and operation. The criteria for citizen designers is that they don't need deep technical skills. They don't need to be able to write code. With this model, there's a real benefit in creating a separation between RPA execution platforms. With citizen designers, there's no need to have people learn how to use Blue Prism Studio or what have you, because once again, our belief's that you're going to end up with multiple execution platforms. It's what we're seeing already evolving in the field and fairly rapidly. Organizations are using a combination of Microsoft Power Automate and UiPath or UiPath and Blue Prism across different sectors. So you need a universal way of designing processes independent of that implementation platform. In other words, something that's not platform specific, but instead platform agnostic. If you deploy a set of tools where folks can easily capture and provide the low-level details around your processes to be automated, and then pass that efficiently into the COE, that's a much more scalable model. From our point of view, that's the best practice we're seeing in the market right now, operationally, which is a bit of a contrarian view to the conventional wisdom, again, of that citizen developer. When you dig into how the citizen designer model actually works, or specifically the separation of roles between citizen designer and the RPA COE, it looks kind of like this. The citizen designers are essentially responsible for going out and using a set of capabilities or tools to discover processes for improvement. We talked earlier about the various discovery options out there, particularly the process mining and task mining. At Blueprint, we offer our own task capture tool that captures very low-level data and gives you some specifics on the exact actions and parameters of a process that need to be automated. But really the big distinction and what we believe every organization ultimately needs is a design capability. The reason is because any of the mining tools or capture tools can tell you what's happening. They're recording actual occurrences of people performing work, but they don't really layer in why or why people are making the choices they're making in the work they do. Why you might do one thing versus another when you're recording a task as a worker, perhaps is because of a business rule. Or why you might have a certain set of actions, why you might have a process function the way it does. It's often the result of things like rules, as I mentioned, or policies, compliance reasons or controls, regulatory obligations, some security mandate, right? Mining and capture tools cannot capture that. So being able to layer in those constraints, I would call it, and additional dependencies is pretty critical in any large organizations because those things evolve and change as well. So being able to manage change is one of the most important capabilities that any organization also needs to develop. It's not a closely held secret that automations can be brittle, of course, and that brittleness is directly correlated to the rate of change of their context. In other words, the underlying systems changing, but also policies changing, procedures changing, business rules changing. So understanding all of that information and their interdependencies is critical if you're going to manage the impact of those changes on your automations. So once you can layer in all that design information, then hand it off to your RPA COE for implementation and final development, that's how we see this model of citizen designer at work. So once again, Blueprint has some special tooling that can transform that design into low-level implementation details and even partial implementations to accelerate RPA development And again, we'll show you that in a few moments in the demo that we're going to provide. So now that you have an operational model and a platform in place, which processes are you going to actually go out and target for automation? Well, you're obviously going to pick the processes that will deliver the most business value. There's some attributes around those processes that are indicative of their business value, like whether they're rules-based, highly repeatable, volume of execution, and so on. But what's often overlooked is the ability to actually turn that business process into an automation, or in other words, the ease of automating the business process. This is something we believe is often not factored into the identification and prioritization of RPA candidates. Our point of view is that you have to look at the underlying capabilities of those processes. One example is platform volatility. There's underlying technologies that support the platform that a process is tied to, which are highly volatile and undergo changes very often, and you don't have any control over that rate of change. In addition, you have to consider the inherent process complexity, because as you layer in more complexity in terms of decision making within the process, there's opportunity for breaks and exceptions and variances. And these are the things also that can cause automations to fail. Those considerations are all the things that are discoverable. So with our task capture capability here at Blueprint, you can discover all those things and then factor them into that multidimensional analysis I referred to, which includes not only which processes are of high value, but also which platform you should execute that automation in, if you do indeed have multiple platforms in your organization. So that's our point of view on what we think are the three critical questions around RPA: your platform, tooling choices, your operational model, and ultimately your prioritization decisions. So we think that if you can make the right decisions around those three critical questions, you have an opportunity to really accelerate automation, drive digital transformation in your organization with RPA. Using our platform, we think that you can maximize the value that you can extract from RPA and substantially reduce your automation outages, which severely limit your return. So what I want to do now is just spend a little bit of time showing you how we do one aspect of this in our platform, specifically capturing tasks. And this is really the starting point for leveraging the larger Blueprint platform. And no matter the RPA tool that you use to drive the right process choices, your ability to develop the right designs and ultimately will accelerate your automation delivery. So with that, I'm going to take you on a quick drive through that platform that I mentioned, the capture capability. So this is what we're calling that we call Blueprint Task Capture. Again, this is one aspect or portion of the capability that we offer as part of the larger platform. So to start with, I have a higher level process. I just tried to keep it simple for demo purposes, called expenses, where we gather materials for expenses and do 4 other major high level steps. Now, each of these, of course, when you get down into the details, could be many, many, many steps and variations. But I'll pick on one, excuse me, to be recorded. So I, in the role of a citizen designer, will say, look, I need a bunch of workers on the floor to record how they calculate payments. So I'll select calculate payments and then request that tasks be recorded. Now, I'm going to provide a little message asking them to do the recording for me, and then I'll identify those workers who I'd like to perform the recording and hit send. And that basically sends off the request to those individuals. Now, if I pretend that I am one of those workers and have received that email, this is the email I'd receive showing me the context. This is the portion that they're asking me to record, a little bit of instruction or instructional text for me. And then what I can do on my personal machine is hit launch task capture. Now, because we're sending or going to be sending information back to the server, we need to confirm it's actually used. So there's 2-factor authentication involved. Once that's done, then you basically get the task capture translucent screen up where you can actually record. I'll just pick Excel because it's pretty straightforward and simple, and I won't record anything really long. I'll just hit the records, and then you essentially go off and do the work that you would normally do, whether that's in spreadsheet, a browser, what have you, or multiple applications. As you every individual discrete action is identified, screenshots taken, and so on. So just to fast forward, when we stop, it basically will give you a summary view of the task that you recorded, which is a series of steps. And you can scroll left and right if there's many. You can do, I would say, fine adjustments because the worker here is not, a process engineer or anything. So for example, maybe there is a screenshot that has some personal information on it or what have you, they can just hit hide. Doing so means when they submit this back to Blueprint, that information will not go along in the transfer. They could also, just delete some steps that maybe they didn't want to record, etc., or hit the record button here to insert a couple of steps they forgot. So again, kind of fine adjustments. They can have a comment back to the citizen designer who's requesting it. So here's my recording. This is how I do this task 80% of the time. I'll do another one, for the other, 10, the one I do, the next 10 or 15%. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you hit the submit button, and that calls the central server and submits that. And recall, I'm one of several workers doing this, so there's going to be many processes being submitted back up to the Blueprint platform. So if I switch roles back to that citizen designer again, log into the platform, I can see that 4 recordings came in from 4 different people so far. And you can see some details, including the comment that was made a moment ago. So we can pick one of those. And up in Blueprint, we can have a visual of the process that came in with lots of details on it. You can pick individual steps. And this is something fairly unique to Blueprint. We actually transform the very detailed, Windows events like left click, etc. We transform that into the feature function of the application. So we're able to apply some technology we have to do that. And this basically gets put into this catalog of applications, actions, and their parameters, which we call our common object model. This is indeed an abstraction of the most common RPA platforms out there. And it's through this common object model that we're able to keep that independence from RPA platform. So long story short, I can at any point choose to go to either UiPath Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, Microsoft Power Automate Desktop. I can make the choice of implementation platform much later in the cycle. I'm not tied to any one of them. Additional information, we'll bring the screenshots back and so on. So all the information that we can pull from that recording technology on the desktop is pulled into Blueprint from multiple recorders. We can then combine it, reconcile it, optimize it, tune it, reuse other components, for example. And when we're done all of that analysis and design work, we can then again choose the implementation platform, whatever vendor you like, and push it out. So that is the demo I wanted to walk you through today. And that concludes the presentation. So I guess at this point, I'll pass it back to Bruna to invite if you have any questions that were received that you want answered.
Great. Thank you, Tony. That was really great. I'd like to now open up the floor to audience questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to pop it into the questions tab on the control panel on the right side of your screen. We have a few that have come in throughout the presentation, which I will get started with. The first one here is, hello, may I know exactly the main goal of this tool? Is this an RPA migration tool from one vendor solution into another, or is it a process design tool?
Right, so the answer is yes. It is actually all of those things. So it's a very comprehensive platform, but it has multiple use cases. So basically what I showed you today in the very brief demo is the ability to ingest information recorded on people's desktops. But there's other places we can ingest data from, and one of them is existing bots in RPA platforms. So we can, some people call it reverse engineering, but we can ingest the automations from any of those platforms. They become processes in Blueprint. We call them digital blueprints. And they're also translated into or converted into that common object model or common language. And then again, you can just turn around and decide where you want those to go. And it might be from one vendor to a different vendor. There's a migration use case. And we have lots of customers using us precisely for that purpose, but it doesn't have to be migrated. So yes, it can be used as a migration platform. And the other thing is what I didn't show in the demo, when we bring information in, because if we're bringing automations in from RPA platforms, it's typically lots and lots and lots and lots of process information. So we do have analytics capability, built-in dashboards. You can look at all the metrics of the processes that we ingest or bring in, which in many cases opens the eyes and sheds lights on what was kind of a great big mystery, because people didn't even know what they had after years and years of RPA development. So, you know, just understanding what we have as part of perhaps a migration process or net new design, which I showed you the first stage of: task capture, bring it into Blueprint, design the solution, consider the constraints, rules, policies, and so on, reuse components for parts of it, perhaps if you have standardization, and then go out. So yeah, those are two, and there are other use cases as well, but it's at least those two.
Great, awesome. And what RPA platforms do you support?
Right, we support a pretty broad range, but I'll say the marquee, the highest demand that we have is the four that I've mentioned a few times. So UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, Microsoft Power Automate Desktop, well, and Power Automate Cloud Flows.
Another one here. How does Blueprint deal with security vulnerabilities of popular LCNC platforms during migration?
Right, so what we're doing with migration, again, is we're reading from the data sets of those platforms. So whatever's in the data sets, we read, and we have our algorithms, and they're all proprietary and patented algorithms that we have. Very unique in the industry to be able to migrate what we bring in over to the destination. So we don't touch, for example, you know, credential lockers, et cetera, but whatever data is in the data set of that platform, we essentially lift and shift. So that'll end up in the destination platform. Of course, we're an intermediary. Our platform is fully secure. You know, you saw some of the logos earlier. Only, you know, the largest organizations in the world are using it. Cloud hosted, many of them just take it on premise, sometimes for security reasons. But yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Great, we have another one here. So how much effort can I save in a migration scenario with Blueprint?
As you might imagine, the answer is going to be it varies, because it does vary. And there's a few factors, but one obvious one is just the nature of your automations. In other words, are you using very novel, very unique, esoteric applications? Is that what your bots are automating, right? They're all acting against those very strange systems that you don't see very often. Or is 80% of your automations, you know, using Excel and then sending an email, right? So there can be very broad variations, because some of those unique applications are, let's call them unique, and have their own idiosyncrasies. So that's just one factor. I won't lay them all out, but one is just the nature of the automations. But on average, the kind of conversion we get, which I'll come back to what you said, typical conversions that we get out of companies' data sets are 70% to 90%, in that range of the content from the source ends up in the destination not having to be touched. So the commands are mapped, the parameters are mapped, the expressions are mapped, and operations are mapped, the variables, etc. 70 to 90 on average, right? Some of them are 100, right? Some are a little less, but it's in that range. And so that's the kind of lift and shift that we're doing. And then of course the developers go in and just finish off the balance of that. The last one we did, I think, was around 86, 87%, right? So that's like 13% of the content just needs to be hand adjusted, essentially. But I mean, savings again, based on that, anywhere to like 70% of the effort. Just to throw a number out, of course, again, it varies.
We have 3 separate questions asking, how does blueprint licensing work?
Right. So we got a few different models, but I guess and get in touch with us. We'll look at your particular situation. Migration's a little different than the design part, but one thing of note is it's not user-based licensing, for example, because we don't want to inhibit or prevent people who need to access it from accessing it. So it's really based on the process or the digital blueprint. Right, so those are the units of value in the platform, and you can buy quantities or volumes of those, and when they're consumed, we ship a license, you can buy more. But basically, it's if you do more migrations, if you do more designs, you see unlimited number of people can come in and collaborate, but it's really the charge metric is that unit of value, which is the process you're designing.
Another one here. So is your solution for end-to-end RPA automations to enable intelligent automation?
If I understand the question right, could you repeat it? Just to make sure.
Yep. Is your solution for end-to-end RPA automations to enable intelligent automation?
Yes. Now, when you say end-to-end, first thing I think of is one thing many companies and our customers are striving to do, right? Which is be able to automate not just swivel chair tasks or small atomic pieces of work, but larger and larger end-to-end tasks, right? Or end-to-end processes. And portions of those processes may still be human driven, portions may be driven by RPA, portions by, I don't know, low code, no code, portions by other technologies, right? And the answer is yes. So basically our platform is a very capable, very highly scalable automation platform where we can model higher level end-to-end processes, and as we decompose them, identify which automation technology is most suitable for which portion of that. So that provides what we call the context, which is hugely important and hugely valuable, because once we shift our mindset to these higher level, higher value processes and start to automate and optimize those, that's where the value starts to compound.
Another one here, that's kind of a follow-up. If a process is decommissioned, does that free the license for that process for another process?
No. So the processes, and the analogy I use is, razor blades. The processes are consumables, but we price it accordingly. And again, get in touch with us for that. But basically, there's something you consume. You get a process, you literally activate it. There's a button called activate, and that's what triggers the license consumption, and that turns on a whole other set of features and capabilities, including export to any RPA platform, just to say one of them. And basically you do the work you need to do, you do your design work, you push that to RPA platform. If you delete that process, that doesn't mean magically you get another license. You consume that license. So it's a consumption model.
Okay, another one here. So without recording the process, can I design the flow in brackets like Visio and export into RPA to make ready the automation?
Yes, and any combination thereof. So it is a full editor. You could start with a blank sheet of paper and just, from your mind or from human surveys you did of the workers. You don't have to use the task recording capability. You can basically create a process, draw a process literally, and you could send that to the RPA. You could go a step further, and on the steps of the process, you probably saw, remember the COM catalog? Each step, you could go in and pick the application and the command and even enter parameters, right? So you can characterize this process at a high skeletal level or very detailed, it's up to you, and push it over to the RPA platform for implementation. So the origins of the process could just be from you, from your mind, typing on a blank sheet of paper. They could come from task capture and send them over, or like I say, a combination, come from task capture, and then you can edit and adjust and change and add and extend, and then send them over.
So one more here, and we have a couple other questions, but I just want to be conscious of time, so I'm going to make this our last question. Does Blueprint compete with process mining tools or complement? What is the value proposition for selling Blueprint to prospects who already have process mining tools and RPA platforms?
No, we're intended to be part of a larger ecosystem. Now, you saw today we have our own task capture, but that doesn't mean we won't ingest from other vendors' mining tools, be they process mining or task mining, or even other esoteric sources we can pull in from. We want to be that hub, the process hub, pull in from any source. And literally we can ingest, unstructured Word documents. We can import from Visio, right? We can import from RPA tools I mentioned. And we can pull in from other process mining and task mining tools, or our own task mining tool, right? So, and go out to the RPA tools that I already listed and mentioned. So we just want to be this universal hub, but to answer the question, yes, we can pull in from other mining tools, so we can fit into whatever ecosystem. Everybody's made investments already, we know that, in different things, and we want to be able to fit in. So, we have APIs for that purpose and purpose-built integrations, like I said, for the RPA tools.
Great, awesome. So that was our final question. This has been a very active group, and I know there are questions left unanswered, in which case don't hesitate to reach out to our team. If you have questions that we weren't able to get to, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today. And just as a note, you can find some handouts in the handout section of the control panel. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Tony.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right.